Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining us today. This is the second part of an Azure series that Aman is doing, so keep your eye out for more coming down the line. My name is Joe Kozlowitz. I'm on the marketing team here at Greenhouse Data. I'm just going to give a very quick intro, and then I'll hand things over to Aman, who is our presenter today. A few quick notes on Greenhouse Data. We focus on operationalizing innovation. So we're a platform agnostic managed IT services provider. We want to simplify your IT operations. We extend your teams, and we do that with over 70% of our personnel focused entirely on our clients in technical roles and support. So we have a very strong leadership team. We're looking for people who are trying to grow and scale, especially in the cloud and in enterprise advisory services. We are based throughout North America primarily. We're highly focused in the mid-market, large private organizations, and large public. And as I mentioned, we're platform agnostic, so we do a lot of work in Azure. We also do VMware, any kind of data center service. You'll see a few logos here that you probably recognize from clients we've had over the years. And while we do focus in North America, we have clients all over the globe. We're a service-driven organization, so we're focused on multi-cloud management, professional services, DevOps frameworks, data center, and applications, and we wrap all of that with managed services. A quick overview of our agenda today. We're going to be running through some Azure Automation basics. Aman's going to have some demo concepts and features. He's going to actually show you Azure functions, and then we'll have a quick Q&A at the end. At any time, feel free to throw out questions on the chat or using the question feature in GoToWebinar. And if it works in during the presentation, I'll go ahead and ask them. Otherwise, we'll run through all of them at the end. We'll also have a recording sent out. So if you need to jump off early, we will be sending the full session your way. Aman Sharma is our presenter today. He's a Microsoft Azure MVP. He's also the principal technical consultant at Greenhouse Data, and his contact information is here on the screen. Feel free to reach out directly to him or to any of the Greenhouse Data team members. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Aman.
Perfect. Thanks, Joe. So I've started sharing my screen. Can you see the screen, Joe?
Yep.
Perfect. So I'll get right into it. In this session, we'll be discussing on the ways to automate your infrastructure, the ways you have to automate your infrastructure as well as your DevOps environment, as well as your platform as a service environment. We'll be discussing about Azure Automation and Azure Functions. So let's dive right into it with the Azure Automation. This is the first part. We'll see two demos around it, and then we'll jump into Azure Functions, and we'll see that in action as well. So Azure Automation basics. What exactly is Azure Automation? Azure Automation is the process automation where you specify what is the script, what is the automation that you want to run. You do not worry about the infrastructure behind the scene. So that infrastructure under the hood is abstracted. You do not need to provision that. Microsoft takes care of that. And the automation is provided to you as a service. This is part of OMS Suites, which has log analytics and Azure Site Recovery and various other services under its umbrella. It simplifies the cloud as well as on-prem management. We'll see how we can do that. Azure Automation is not only automation for your cloud, be it Azure or AWS, it can even manage your on-premises infrastructure. It also provides heterogeneous configuration management through desired state configurations. We'll not be diving into desired state configurations today, but if there is interest in it, if you want to look at it, we can take this up in one of the future sessions. So let's see your journey towards your first Runbook. So I developed this slide to visualize what are the different concepts that you require to be able to create the first runbook, and then we'll dive into the first demo of this session. You start your journey as a young Padawan, and the first thing that you need to know on this journey to create first runbook is that you need automation account. Automation account is the logical grouping of all the different runbooks. What is a runbook, you ask? A runbook is the smallest possible unit in Azure Automation that has the script that you want to run based on whatever scenario that you may have. So how can you create an automation account? Automation account can be created inside a resource group, and it has to exist within a particular region. For example, East US, West US, Central US, these are some of the regions. Northern Europe, these are the regions in which you create your resources. You select these regions based on the proximity to your location or proximity to the other services that you have in Azure environment. Once you have the automation account where everything is going to sit, the next thing you need to know whether you want to run the automation only in Azure or you want it to run also on premises or in your other environments other than Azure. To be able to do that, to be able to access your private network, you need to create something called hybrid worker. Hybrid worker is a hook into your environment. Through this, you get access into your environment where you can run the same automation that you run in Azure, but on your private network. A hybrid worker is nothing but an Azure VM or AWS VM or even an on-premise VM or a server. This is where your automation can run instead of Azure. This is just another choice that you have. The next thing that you need to know is the concept of assets. Assets are some things that are globally available to all your runbooks. These are reusable components that you can access across runbooks. There are 6 major types of assets that are in the Azure Automation. The first one of them is schedules. Schedules are the way you tell your runbooks to run once every hour or once every day or once every month. You create the schedule once and you can link up multiple runbooks to that schedule so that the runbooks, they will adhere to your schedule. You have modules. These are PowerShell modules or Python modules through which you extend the functionality. If you want to, for example, target SQL Server and automate the configuration, the management of a SQL database, you can add the module for that and get the commandlets to manage your SQL database. You have certificates and credentials. These are the ways where you securely store the information regarding your certificates or your credentials to connect to various different systems. How to connect to different systems? You mentioned that in the connections. For example, you have virtual machine manager on premises. You can create a connection to that. You have an different Azure instance in a different subscription. You can create a connection of type service principal and create a connection to that. Variables are the most used assets amongst all. These are the key value pairs that can give you the ability to define the key value pairs once and reuse them multiple times. For example, you want to write a runbook that can automatically send an email. You provide the SMTP IP address in just one variable, and then you can reuse that in multiple runbooks. Lastly, when you are creating the runbook, you need to know that there are primarily 3 different types of runbooks. Now there is even 4th one added. The first one is PowerShell workflow. This has the additional capability of suspending or resuming the workflow, resuming the execution while the runbook is still running. PowerShell is the most used ones. Why? Because you already have scripts on premises that you can leverage today. You can reuse the runbooks or the PowerShell scripts that you have already written on premises. Graphical is the last one, which I do not recommend, but if you do not have experience with PowerShell, then this is the option that you can leverage. It's as easy as dragging and dropping activities onto the canvas and then linking the activities together. This takes us to our very first demo of this session. In this demo, the concepts that we saw will experience them in action. So right now I'm logged into the Azure portal. This is the Azure environment. To create a new Azure Automation account, what I'll do is, as with any other resource creation, I'll go to the Create a Resource button. And then over here, I'll search for Azure Automation. And then I'll see that option categorized under Developer Tools. I can click on that option. I can go through the synopsis of what this is, and then hit Create. It will ask me for the basic information. What should the automation account be? I can select the subscription. If I have multiple, I can select which one I want to target. And then I can target a resource group as well. I can create a new resource group. I can hit OK. And then run as account is another concept. So remember we talked about credentials and certificates. If you want to work with Azure, Azure gives you the out-of-the-box ability to create that certificate, to create the connection, to connect to the Azure services for the subscription that you have selected. Automatically, a run as account will be created. Automatically, the credentials, the certificate, the connection for that will be created within the Runbook. So I'll hit yes for this and hit create. Right now, I have the classic version disabled, so Azure Run as account will only be created for the newer version. If you are not aware, Azure used to have a different deployment model, which was called Azure Service Manager. That has been deprecated. Everything in here is called Azure Resource Manager or ARM deployment model. If you want to learn more about this, you can refer to the earlier session, the link to which will also be shared later on. So I can review the progress of my deployment in the notifications bar. So now once the notification is done, the deployment is complete. I can click on go to resources and see the resources right there. As you can see, the link has just now appeared. And the run as account, they are being created right now. Instead of going to the resource from here, I have a couple of ways through which I can go. I can click on Automation Accounts service under Favorites. If you don't see this under Favorites, you can go to All Services and search for this particular service. You can just search for Azure Automation. And then just click on the star to save this service under the Favorites and then reorder it. You can see that this automation account is here. Or what I can do is to navigate to this, I can go to the resource groups. And then I can navigate to the resource group that we created, that is Archie-Azure Awareness Demo. And then I can see that the automation account has been created, along with some runbooks that have already been created as tutorials for me. These can serve as the starting point, which you can leverage to study about Azure Automation, to look at how the runbooks should look like with all the best practices in place. So I'll click on the automation account to navigate to its blade. Now in here, just like any other resource, if you want to learn about the resource, learn about various features and settings that it has. So in here, the feature that I'm interested in is under the process automation, the Runbook section. Under this Runbook section, I have multiple features. I have the feature to import a Runbook. If you have an existing PS1 PowerShell script, you can import that. Or if you have exported a Runbook from another environment, you can import it here by clicking on Import a Runbook. And then in the new blade, you can select the Runbook file. Provide a name, provide the Runbook type, and a description, and hit Create. You can even browse the gallery and look at the runbooks that have been created by the community. Any scenario that you want to search for example, starting off Azure VM, I can already see that that runbook is already there, but this is a graphical runbook. I want to look at the PowerShell version of this. So this start Azure VM, this is the PowerShell. As I can see from the icon, I can click on this runbook. It will show me the whole source code for this particular runbook in the preview window. I can hit import and this runbook will be created for me. For now, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and click on create a runbook. I'll name this as Hello World Runbook. Provide the type as PowerShell. Here you can see that the other types that are available to you are Python, graphical, PowerShell workflow, or graphical PowerShell workflow. So PowerShell is the one that we'll select right now. Or you can optionally provide it with the description and then hit create. Once the runbook is created, it will show it as completed in the notification section, and it will also show up here. It automatically takes me to the edit mode for this particular runbook. If it does not take you to the edit mode for this particular runbook, or you close the browser, you come in the next day and you want to edit this particular runbook, you navigate to the runbook section. It will show up here in this list. You click on this Hello World runbook. Once in the blade for the runbook itself, you can click on the edit button at the top and start typing your PowerShell script here. So for a very simple scenario, I'll just type write output for a very simple message. I can hit save to save this particular runbook, and then I have two options. Either I can publish, or before publishing my changes, I can test those in the test pane. So I click on the test pane. I hit start. Now, multiple things happen when I hit start. As you can see, it says that the status is queued. What happens behind the scene is your job, it is queued in the Microsoft infrastructure behind the scene. Within that infrastructure, the code goes and performs the execution. The whole infrastructure layer is abstracted to us. And then whatever our script was intended to do, it will perform that action and will provide you with the output in the bottom part of the test pane. So once I'm done editing all the changes, I can hit publish. Now, once the runbook is published, to execute the runbook in a production scenario, you will not run it like we did from the test pane. You will run it directly from the runbook itself. You will either run it by clicking on the start here, or you can run it by programmatically by invoking it through another script or something called webhooks that we'll see shortly. So this runbook, you can see that the job status says completed. I can navigate to the output for this, and it displays the simple message that we wanted to output in this particular runbook. This is fairly simple runbook that we saw in the first demo. This runbook provides you with the capability to reuse all the PowerShell scripts that you have and then package them in a automation that you can execute for any of the events that can occur in Azure infrastructure. We'll return back to the environment in the next demo, but let's review some of the concepts that we just saw. So key points that we need to check are that whenever you are going to author a runbook, it's a best practice to always check the gallery first. There is a chance that somebody else has already written the runbook for you. Why reinvent the wheel if that runbook is already available from the marketplace? Use that as the starting point and then build on top of that. The run as account we already saw for any Azure related operations. It's a best practice that you create that run as account and then leverage that run as account to create anything related to Azure. If you have Azure virtual machines that you want to manage or report on, or take an action based on something that happens on that on those VMs. For example, an alert is generated. You can have a runbook that will be automatically invoked through log analytics. It's always a best practice not to hard code the credentials or certificates in your Azure Automation runbooks. Always store them in certificates or credential assets. You can check the running instances of runbooks via jobs. We'll look at the jobs in more details in the second demo. You can check current as well as the historic executions of the various runbooks. This is how you perform audit on your Azure Automation. What did run? Why did it run? Which was the process that invoked? What was the input provider? All that audit you can run through jobs. When it comes to scheduling the runbooks, you can create the schedules, which we'll also see in the upcoming demo. You can enable your runbooks to follow a certain schedule so that it will run at a particular time of the day, a particular time of the month, etc. For example, if you want to have all VMs shut down in off work hours and then have them in the starter running state when the employees resume work the next day, you can have that automation built very easily. As we saw, the runbooks for that are already there in the marketplace for Azure Automation. You can leverage those. VM shutdown capability is now provided out of the box along with each and every VM in Azure. But starting off the VM, that is not provided out of the box for various reasons. And you can use Azure Automation for that particular scenario in your environment. You can export the runbooks and import them later, as we saw earlier. Why would you do this? If, for example, you want to export all the runbooks from your development environment and import them into test or production environment, you can export all of them using a simple PowerShell command or using the portal as we saw, and then import them into the target environment. Webhooks is another cool concept that Azure Automation provides. To this concept, you can programmatically invoke your runbooks. You can have third-party systems like BMC Remedy um, or any other monitoring tool that is out there, so that through those systems you can invoke the automation. Let's say an alert occurs in your environment and you are not using log analytics, you're using a third-party system to monitor your environment. So you can monitor and take an action by just invoking a URL that is very specific to your runbook. We'll see this in action shortly in the next upcoming demo. So I'll navigate back to the runbooks. So let's first talk about the webhooks, since this was the last concept that we just reviewed. So I'll navigate back to my runbook. And under the settings, I see that I have the webhooks available as one of the settings, or I have the option to add a webhook at the top. I'll use this option to create a new webhook. I can provide the name of the webhook here. I can provide an expiry date for this particular webhook. And then this is the URL. Now, the primary thing that you need to note is this URL is not displayed again. This is displayed only once. You should copy it and store it someplace safe. It even says this at the top that once you hit OK, this URL will not be shared again. So you hit OK. Another settings that you need to modify is, or you can modify is, if your runbook takes in any parameters, you can define what the values will be when invoked through webhook. If you have hybrid worker in the environment, then you can also configure whether this runbook should run only on Azure or on the hybrid worker. I can hit create to create this particular webhook, and now we are ready to even invoke this particular runbook programmatically using that particular URL that we created. Another thing I want to demo is the different assets that we talked about. Let's look at the schedules. Here right now, I do not have any schedule. What I can do is I can click on add a schedule, and then I can say something like daily 12:30 p.m. and configure it to run starting today at 12:30 p.m. Recurrence, I can provide the recurrence that it should run once every hour or once every day. The smallest that I can do is once every hour. If you want the runbook to run, so it says that the time has to be at least 5 minutes after the current time. And since that window is within the current time, so it will not allow me to do this. So I changed the time to 12:35, but I forgot to change the name, but that's all right. The schedule still follows the schedule that we have configured in it. Now to link this to a runbook, I have multiple ways. I can link it through the schedule, or I can link it through the runbook. So I can navigate to my runbooks, click on the runbook that we want, and then on the left-hand side, you see I have the schedules. I can add it to a schedule. When you are linking your runbook to a schedule, you have the option to creating a new schedule or selecting one that you have already created. And then similar to what we saw under webhooks, you have the option to configure the parameters, to configure the run settings for this particular runbook. So once I do, it will say that this runbook is already configured to run as per this particular schedule, which is once every day at 12:35 p.m. Eastern time. That's all about schedules that you need to know. Another concept is what we talked about is the modules. Under modules, you have multiple modules already pre-configured when we created the runbook or the Azure Automation account. You can add multiple modules here by clicking on add a module and uploading the PST1 file, that is your module file, in a zip format, and uploading it into the Azure Automation account. Or if you want to find out a module from the marketplace, you know that it is a pretty common module that should be already there. You can search it in the gallery. As you can see, there are multiple modules provided out of the box in the gallery. This is a marketplace for the modules that you can browse and select your module from here if it is available. There is the list does not end here. There is a button for load more. This is only the letter A. The list is pretty long, so you will have to use the search bar at the top to find the module that you are looking for. You have the Python packages similar to PowerShell modules. You have packages with Python. You can upload those and leverage those in your Python-based runbooks. Credentials are fairly simple. When you hit a credential, all you need to do is provide a username and a password and save the credential, and then you can access these right from within your runbook. These are encrypted by default, and the decryption happens automatically when you access these from within a runbook. As I was telling you earlier, for Azure Runbook account that we create, the Runbook connection is automatically created. This is where that Runbook connection was created of type Azure Service Principal. Similarly, we'll see that a certificate is also there for Azure Runbook account. Variables, as we discussed earlier, these are simple key value pair. For example, counter for execution, if you are trying to check the execution, how many times it has executed. And then you have the data type that you can select either as string, Boolean, datetime, integer, or if it's an object, you can select not specified. For this, I can select integer value and I can provide it a default value. I can select whether to encrypt this or not. Let's say I provide it with this value and encrypt it. And once I hit create, I'll not be able to see that particular value. Even if I click on this, I'll not be able to see that particular value. When I hit edit, I'll have to provide a new value for this. I'll not be able to see the existing value for this for the security reasons. This value is accessible from within the runbooks. The decryption, as I said earlier, it happens automatically behind the scene. Now, the last thing that you need to know about Azure Automation is how you perform audits. And as I said earlier, the audits, they are performed leveraging the jobs. So I'll navigate to the job section. This is where all the jobs related to all the runbooks, they all appear here. If I go to the runbooks and I navigate to one of the tutorial runbook and I hit start on that particular runbook, and then I immediately go back to the job section. This is where you will see all the jobs appearing. As you can see, the job that I just ran, it also appears here, and it shows me that that job is right now in the queued state. I refresh it, and it shows me the up-to-date status of this particular job. I can click on a particular job that has already run, and saw what its inputs were, if there were any errors, warnings, what were all the logs related to that runbook, and I can look at the output for that particular runbook execution. I can see when that execution ran, what was the source snapshot. Let's say if somebody changes the runbook code for that particular runbook, what was the source code for that particular runbook when this job ran? You can look at that as well. That's all there is to it as far as the Azure Automation is concerned. We'll jump back to the presentation where we'll start looking at the concept of Azure functions. Joe, if there are any questions related to Azure Automation, I can take those up before moving forward.
I just have one question, and that is, what happens if runbooks have conflicting scripts?
So if runbooks have conflicting scripts, it depends on the scenario. Let's say two runbooks run and they both try to access the same source, or they both try to perform similar operation, or they try to perform a different operation. At any given point in time, the resource will be locked by one runbook, and the other runbook will be in the waiting stage for the first runbook to finish. Whichever runbook runs first will perform its operation, and then that will be overridden with the second runbook operation.
Great, thanks.
No problem. Now, the other key concept that has emerged and is picking up really fast and is the future for all serverless application architecture is Azure Functions. This is a very powerful concept. If you are a developer in C#, F#, JavaScript, or Java, this will be of very high interest to you. So what exactly is Azure Functions? Azure Function is a serverless application platform. You just tell what is the C# function that you want to execute, and it is executed for you, much similar to how Azure Automation executes the PowerShell script for you. So you provide your Azure function, and then you provide the conditions on which that function needs to be executed, and then you do not need to worry about what infrastructure needs to be provisioned or where it needs to be provisioned. You host and execute your logic without provisioning any infrastructure. This can be one component in your microservices architecture. In fact, this can be a repeatable component that you can leverage multiple times. One such example that I definitely worked on was you upload something from your website, you store that document in the blob storage, and then you send the information in a service bus queue or Azure storage queue. Azure Functions can natively, out of the box, can read from Azure service bus queues or storage queues, and then you can take actions based on what was uploaded. You can send out an email, you can take any action that you want, and after that, you can make an entry into the database leveraging nothing but Azure Functions. They are intrinsically scalable. What that means is If your application logic, it requires a lot of scale, lot of compute power, automatically the underlying infrastructure that will scale up. And once that compute power is not required, your infrastructure will scale down for you. If you want to reference external DLLs or any packages, for example, Newtonsoft JSON or Entity Framework, etc., you have the complete support of NuGet or NPM packet managers through which you can add and reference all those third-party or even Microsoft DLLs that give enhancement to your code. You can code in different languages. You can code in C Sharp, F Sharp, which comes under the .NET framework. You can code under JavaScript. You can even code with Java, leveraging Azure functions. Azure functions are event-driven. What that means is there occurs an event in your environment, and that event can trigger Azure functions automatically. Something gets added to Azure Storage Blob. For example, somebody uploads a file. Azure functions can automatically pick up and detect that that event has occurred and can automatically fire away your code. Somebody sends out an email. Azure functions can pick that up and perform whatever you want to be executed on that particular event. It is stateless in nature. That means some event occurs, you execute the Azure function, and then you are done with it. There is no state maintained. If you are building applications like payment gateways or e-commerce websites, then you can still use Azure functions to execute business logic, but to maintain the state itself, you need to have conventional app service or any other system in place through which you maintain the state of the system. When you are creating function plans, there are two plans that you can select from. One is the consumption plan. Second is the Azure App Service plan. Consumption plan is what is the serverless application platform. Consumption plan means that you will be billed only when your functions are running. You will not be billed when your functions are not running. The infrastructure will automatically be provisioned, will automatically scale up or down based on the usage of your function. When they are executing, only then the functions will be assigned the infrastructure. If you want predictive execution of the functions, if you have requirements like that, that you want your function to be executed on at least 16 GB of RAM, then you need to select App Service Plan. This is not the serverless architecture, but you have pre-selected resources. This is similar to how hosting services work. Hosting services like GoDaddy or even Azure App Services, they provide you with pre-packaged plans. You can select from one of those plans, and then based on that, your infrastructure, you will know it beforehand that what is the minimum specs for that particular infrastructure where your function apps will run. Now, if functions are such a cool concept, if they give you reusable concept in a serverless architecture, why not use them all the time? What are the scenarios when you do not want to leverage Azure functions? Execution time is one of the key factors that you should think about. If you have timeouts that can, if your application can take more than 10 minutes to perform its logic, then functions will time out and it will report that the function was not able to complete its execution in time. Whereas you know that your logic itself is going to take more than 10 minutes. The default timeout is 5 minutes. Max, you can configure it is up to 10 minutes. If your application is going to run continuously, then you do not want to use functions. If you still want to use functions, then I recommend that you use App Service Plan. Because then if it is running continuously, then under the consumption plan, you will end up paying more rather than in the predictive plan, which is the App Service Plan. Other key concepts related to Azure functions are it has triggers, it has various inputs and outputs. Triggers is what triggers the execution of Azure function. For example, adding a file to Azure Storage Blob or adding a message to Service Bus Queue. Based on that, you can have Azure function triggered. And then you can have multiple inputs. The inputs coming in from that Azure Storage Blob itself, from Service Bus Queue, directly from the webhook, directly from the HTTP request. And then you can output the data to multiple different outputs. You can send out an email. You can return the response in the HTTP call itself. You can create a new file and share that file using OneDrive. You can have multiple outputs, which we'll see soon in our demo. How to monitor the functions? You can leverage application insights to monitor the functions. It is already the industry standard to monitor your Azure Web Apps, app service, leveraging application insights. It has withhold the time, the test of time. It is also now the language, the same that is being used in log analytics. Application insights is very powerful and can give you in-depth analysis to what is happening under the hood. If your applications, they are performing slow, what is the slow step, or how to troubleshoot and debug that? You can do all that leveraging application insights. This brings us to our final demo of this particular session, which is related to Azure Functions. I'll jump back into the Azure portal, navigate to my home. I'll again click on Create a Resource. And then I can go to the search bar and search for Function App. And then I can click on Create and create the Function App. Now over here, all you need to do is first provide the name of the function app. You need to note that this name needs to be globally unique, because under the hood, there will be a domain name assigned to this, which will be functions101.azurewebsites.net. Then just like any other resource, you select the subscription and you select the resource group. Earlier, we created a new resource group. This time, we can select one of the existing resource group. You can target the OS which you want, where you want your application to run. For this demo, I'll target Windows. This is the plans that we were talking about earlier. Consumption plan, which is the serverless plan, where you pay only for the time your application is running. And then you select the location, select the one which is either closest to you or closest to the resources that you have in Azure. You can select the runtime stack. This is where we were selecting, we were talking about that you can use C# and F# under .NET stack. You can use JavaScript under JavaScript stack and Java under its own stack. For the demo, we'll use .NET stack. We can create a new storage, or I can use an existing storage for diagnostics related information. And then I can have application insights created for me, or I can reuse an existing application insights. I can hit create. It will perform the validations based on the inputs that I have provided, and then it will go ahead and start creating this particular resource. It says the validation was successful and the deployment has been submitted, and this is now being deployed for me. The place that where this will appear is either I can go to the resource group and see that it will come under the same resource group, or I can go to the app services section and it will soon appear here. This is one of the functions that I have already created prior to this particular session. So once this deployment is complete, we'll see that our function will show up here in this particular list. While we're waiting, if there are any other questions, I can take those up.
Yeah, perfect timing, Aman. We have one here. This person has a function already written from a project on premises in C#, and they're wondering if they can reuse them within Azure Functions.
Absolutely, absolutely. You can reuse your code, and that is the whole purpose of why Microsoft is trying to come up with the similar technologies, that is C# or Java. You can reuse all that code. The key logic, all that you can reuse, but you will need to adapt the code to some of the concepts in Azure. For example, if you are targeting an event-driven programming, you will need to adapt the code to expect that event and then interact with that event. Perfect. So we have the function ready for us as well. I'll navigate to this function. Now, the function app itself is a container. Within the app itself, I can have multiple functions created inside this particular app. I can also change its feature right from here. I can go to the platform features. I can go to application settings. If you have different codes, different version of different code, I can target that. I can target different platform. I can target different HTTP version. There are multiple settings here, just like with any other app service that I can target. For now, during this demo, we'll not get into all those settings. I'll go ahead and create a new function. It gives me with a clean GUI-based creation of the function. You can leverage Visual Studio, VS Code, or any other code editor to create the functions. For this demo, we'll select in portal. And then you can have the function execute based on the webhook call. That means somebody does an HTTP post or HTTP GET request, the function will get executed. Or you can have the timer based function. That means, the function will get executed based on a particular schedule. It will execute once every hour or once every day, similar to what we saw with Azure automations. There are multiple more templates. We'll see these templates. These are part of the trigger set. What can trigger a function? We'll look at this later in the demo. So I'll select webhook plus API for this particular demo and hit create. This will go ahead and create a function for me. The name of the function by default is HTTP trigger 1. And it will soon show me the code here, a C# or F# code that will appear here for my function. So as you can see, that extension of the underlying file is CSX. And this is the code that gets created. The code simply, if you look at this, it is taking in a query parameter that is a query string. And then based on the query string, it is fetching that name into the name variable, and then it is simply outputting hello, that name. I'll change this message a little bit. And then I'll hit save. Now I have multiple ways to execute this. I can simply hit run here to test it out, or how I would do in the production scenario or even in the testing scenario, I would generate a URL for this particular function, copy that URL, and then I'll invoke this function through my API or through a different code. For the demo, I can invoke this directly from here. I need to pass a name parameter. Let's say I pass the name as Wendy. The message will say, hello, Wendy from Azure Awareness Session, as we configure in the function. Now, this is the place where you can write any code, the reusable code that you said that you already have on-prem. You will put it in here. Only thing is, this HTTP request, you need to adapt your code to expect this particular object and then interact with this particular object within your code. Now we talked about the triggers, the input, and the outputs. This is the integrate screen is where you configure all that. Right now, the trigger is for HTTP. You can delete this trigger, and then you can create a new trigger. What will trigger this runbook? Timer is the scheduling option. Azure Queue Storage, Blob Storage, HTTP is the one we were just using. Azure Service Bus, Event Hub, Graph Webhook, Activity. Between these particular options, you can have multiple systems trigger this particular Azure function. HTTP is the most common one. I can select that back again, and then select the methods through which we will be allowing this function to be invocable. Then I can add additional inputs to this. I can simply click on add an input, and then I can provide a blob storage, a file, a PDF file, for example, or a JPG, PNG file from the blob directly from here. Right now we are outputting to only Azure API. I can click on new output and send out an Outlook mail message, or I can use SendGrid to send out an email externally, or I can use Twilio to send out SMS notification on the completion of the execution of this particular function. Now, finally, if you want to monitor the executions of this particular function, you can see the data here. Right now, for the execution that we did using this particular API call, it does not show up here because the data is delayed by up to 5 minutes. After 5 minutes is when this data will start appearing in this particular screen. And then similar to how we saw in Azure Automation using jobs, you can perform the audit. This is where you can perform your audit right here. You can even perform further analysis of the execution by clicking on here, Run in Application Insights. This will open another window where you can have access to the complete application insights and run queries to inspect the data, see which were the slowest queries or which were the regions, for example, from where the request came. This is the function app in its entirety. It is very simple to begin with. I recommend that you start leveraging the code that you have already in your environment and follow some of the hands-on labs or guides that are available. I have references to those at the end of this session. But one last thing that I want to discuss before wrapping up this session is what is the difference between Azure Automation and Azure Function? The primary difference is that you would use these for different purposes. Azure Automation you would use to manage your environment, whereas Azure Function you would leverage for any application execution, especially event-driven execution of application. Your Azure Automation can run on premises via hybrid worker, whereas Azure Functions cannot. The availability of programming languages, that is different between the two, as we saw during the session. Functions have the option of running on a hosted environment, leveraging app service environment. That means you can have predictive environment where your function will run. With Azure Automation, that is abstracted. You do not have the choice to select unless until you use hybrid worker. You have automated triggers and output choices with Azure Functions. With Azure Automation, you need to code all that yourself. These are some of the references.
Before you jump into references, I've got one quick question on functions. Sure. And that is, how do I secure function calls only to my environment?
So functions is a secure service. Even though it is a public service, it is still a secure service that only will be available in your environment only. Additionally, as a best practice, you should always inspect the source of the API call or implement advanced constructs like anti-forgery token. You have multiple design patterns and best practices that you can leverage as well. For example, the factory pattern and the gatekeeper pattern is primarily the one that I would use in this particular scenario to ensure that only the API calls that you want to go through, only those are passed and only those are able to access your function.
Thanks.
So these are the references that you can use to kickstart and whatever we discussed in this particular session, you can take that further. I did do a series on Azure Automation that you can check on my YouTube channel, which is on the Harvesting Clouds. And that concludes our session for today. If we have any more questions, I can take those up or we can wrap up this session.
Thanks, Aman. We've got about 5 minutes left here on the session, so we're done slightly early. I don't see any other questions coming in right now. So if you happen to have anything you think of after we wrap here, feel free to reach out to Aman. I'm going to go ahead and throw his contact info back up on the screen here real quick. But thank you everyone for joining, and keep your eye out we're going to have some more sessions coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Thanks, everyone, and happy Friday.